Diffusion of responsibility. It's a phenomenon where in a group we're less likely to take action or engage. You see something that's clearly not okay and you feel that tug to act, and yet you don't. And by act, I don't mean pulling out your phone to record it, post it, text a friend. I mean helping, rendering aid, solving the problem. But sometimes people stop waiting for someone, and they quietly decide, maybe that someone is me. A couple of years ago, CNN aired a documentary about a family facing that dilemma. The episode, A Toxic Tale, Trump's Environmental Impact, was hosted by Dr. Sanjay Gupta and examined the Trump EPA, its widespread approach to environmental deregulation, and the correlating impact that it had on the health of American families. A national audience met a 31-year-old Charleston entrepreneur who went to work at his coffee plant and never came home. He was killed by methylene chloride, a toxic chemical hidden in a paint remover called goof-off. His tragic and completely preventable death pushed his family into a 2-year battle for accountability, a fight that ended when they stood and watched the Environmental Protection Agency sign a permanent ban of methylene chloride and paint strippers into law. That family is mine, and that entrepreneur was my brother, Drew Wynne. I'm here to share how we joined other families, scientists, and advocates to take on the federal government, a powerful chemical lobby, and Fortune 500 companies, and how we won. Not just headlines, but real, meaningful change. But let's go back to where this really begins. Grief from sudden loss doesn't give you time to prepare. It's a tsunami that crashes before you even realize what's happening. Sometimes it arrives in a ring, a text, a handful of words that change everything. Mine came on a fall day in 2017. My dad called and he left a short, shaky voicemail. "Brian, it's Dad. Call home." At that moment, I already knew what waited on the other end of the line wasn't good. I anxiously called him back and he said 2 words that broke my heart and my world. "Drew's dead." People say losing a sibling is like losing a limb. Part of you is gone forever, and that's true. The void is replaced with deep grief that's so paralyzing it turns your life into a before and an after. Now, before I get into how we lost Drew, I think it's important that you meet him first. My brother, Drew Wynne, he was the youngest of 3 boys. He grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, just across the river from Washington, D.C. He was athletic, wildly social, the kind of person whose laugh made strangers turn and smile. When in college, it wasn't clearly his path, so he changed the script. He moved to Charleston, and there he stumbled into his calling, entrepreneurship. Drew and his roommate Jimmy started Riptide Coffee out of their garage. They started with no investors, just figured out how to cold brew coffee, and somehow that scrappy little idea for a coffee company started to take off. Drew lived a Spartan existence at that time. His only paycheck came from a 5 a.m. bagel delivery route. He'd roll out of bed in the dark, deliver bagels while the city slept, then hit the gym and disappear in the roastery for the rest of the day. He was exhausted. He was broke, but he was completely alive. He had joy, love, and purpose. Our last dinner with Drew was different. He was proud. He found his dream venture and he was all in on it. We were proud, especially my parents. He was so driven and optimistic about his future. But that optimism was short-lived. On October 14th, 2017, his dream ended. Drew was working at his plant, preparing his shop floor to repaint. He was working alone that day and he never made it home, which was unlike him. The next morning, Jimmy noticed that Drew's van wasn't in the driveway. Calls and texts, they went unanswered. So Jimmy drove to the plant thinking, well, maybe he got an early start on the day. Drew's van was out front. The door was unlocked. His keys, phone, and wallet were sitting on the front desk. Jimmy walked into the production room and he noticed the walk-in cooler door was open. And that's where he found Drew, laying down, unresponsive. Jimmy sprinted outside to call 911, but it was too late. Drew was already gone. We were told that his death was sudden. The methylene chloride hits like chloroform, that he likely never knew what was happening. The scene was so toxic that the rescue team spent hours ventilating the building before they could even recover his body. And at the medical examiner's office, they had to wear hazmat suits to perform his autopsy. People often ask, what about a mask, protective gear? He had both, a mask and gloves. In fact, it was the same mask sold on the shelf right next to the can, but it wasn't nearly enough. We later learned that OSHA recommends a full protective suit with an independent air supply for that kind of exposure. Picture Walter White in Breaking Bad. And no, you can't buy that at Lowe's. Drew's body was so saturated with methylene chloride that he was deemed unsuitable for organ donation. The chemical that killed him made him that toxic. The week after Drew's death was a blur. My brother Clayton and I tried to shield our parents from the worst while we quietly picked up the pieces. We made calls we never imagined making. We worked the corner to have his body released. We called the funeral home, and when we asked what size urn we needed, I'll never forget the director equating it to about the size of a 5-pound bag of sugar. That's what my brother was reduced to. When the authorities finally declared the coffee plant safe, Clayton, Jimmy, and I went back out to clean it out. Cans of Goof-Off still sat in the production room like nothing had happened. And inside the cooler, Drew's blood and a discarded mask marked the spot where he fell and died. I got to my knees and I started scrubbing the floor. I can still feel the tackiness of his blood on my hands, the lemony scent of Goof-Off lingering in the air. The little things, though, were their own kind of gut punch. Packing up his room, bagging his clothes, deciding what to do with stocking stuffers, every object was a reminder of a life that was cut short. Time started to blur. We'd work all day, numb the pain with bourbon, fall into bed, wake up and do it again. While the outside world kept marching forward with emails, traffic, headlines, we stayed stuck in a deep, dark fog. The day after Drew's memorial was a Sunday. I grabbed a copy of the New York Times for my mom. She unfolded it, looked at the front page, and silently pointed to the headline. Why has the EPA shifted on toxic chemicals? There it was, black and white, methylene chloride, the same chemical that killed Drew. We learned that methylene chloride was supposed to be banned in 2016, but the new EPA leadership team, stacked with former chemical industry lobbyists, quietly stalled the ban, saying they needed to reevaluate decades of science. It was clear. Big chemical greed killed Drew. That fact triggered something in me. Suddenly, my grief changed. It became energy. It was like emotional rocket fuel. I decided then that Drew wasn't going down that easy. He wasn't going to be a faceless statistic. I was going to hunt down accountability. I was restless, but I didn't have a plan, just a search bar. So I started with Goof-Off and methylene chloride, and I learned how a single exposure can end a life in seconds. Then I read quotes from industry spokespeople, twisting the story to blame victims. I learned that methylene chloride was the second most toxic substance available to consumers behind asbestos. Most of you probably weren't aware of that. I didn't know what to do next. Of course, I read about the Office of Chemical Safety and Prevention. The office meant to police these chemicals was being led by the former president of the American Chemistry Council, the chemical industry's top lobbying arm. The fox was no longer lurking around the henhouse. The fox had the keys, the badge, and the title on the door. Now, I didn't know what to do next. Of course, I wanted the product ban. But from where I was sitting, that felt impossibly far away. So I asked myself, what's actually possible? What's the first step? Suddenly, two paths came into focus: awareness and change. Awareness is everywhere. Bumper stickers, billboards, podcasts, social feeds, marches. It's important, but it's broad. Change is different. Awareness might light the fuse, but real change is precise, targeted, strategic. Awareness alone wasn't enough. I wanted to hit back in a way that the industry would feel it. So how do you take down Goliath? There's no secret algorithm, although the industry tried to shake one out of me during a marathon deposition, but I'll tell you how I did it. I'll share 3 lessons I learned along the way. To take on Goliath, I needed allies and experts. Now, I don't have an environmental resume or a lobbying pedigree. I grew up outside of DC, but my experience on Capitol Hill was basically field trips, student government, schoolhouse rock. But what I did have was a recruiting background. I'm comfortable talking to people and reading them. Cold calling is second nature, so I leaned hard into that. I emailed friends, reporters, advocates, anybody who might listen. If there was a phone number attached to a name, I dialed it. Most people didn't pick up, but few did, enough to call to start. Through those few return calls, doors started open. I found real allies: Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families, NRDC, the Environmental Defense Fund, and Dr. Robert Harrison. Each brought something different to the fight: media savvy, scientific credibility, policy expertise, political connections. Now, they didn't always agree with each other. They had their own histories, their own scars, their own playbooks for winning. So it took time to learn how to braid those strengths together. Safer Chemicals, for example, already had a national Mind the Store campaign, which was being led by Mike Shade. It was pressuring major retailers with petitions and protests. They started with change.org signatures, and were going to as far as buying billboards outside of corporate headquarters or buying shares of stock so they could disrupt shareholder meetings. Environmental Defense Fund was pushing too, but in their own different key. They had an awareness piece, yet their approach felt more measured to me, less splashy, more slow and steady. So it made sense to divide the work: Safer Chemicals handling the awareness side, Environmental Defense Fund handling the legislative push. Now, at the time, Republicans controlled Congress, much like today. Now, as much as I valued support from every corner, if we wanted actual change, we needed Republicans at the table. Environmental Defense Fund had a secret weapon: Joanna Slaney, a Capitol Hill veteran with relationships across all political spectrums, including Republican offices. Joanna started opening doors that were difficult to crack: senators, House members, EPA administrators. We even had a call with Trump's then Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. She became our Sherpa on the Hill. I followed her lead, became a chameleon, politically neutral, able to go anywhere I needed to go. Operating unbranded also gave me credibility across the political spectrum. Now imagine if I kicked this off with a photo op in Chuck Schumer's office or by leading a protest in the Senate Hart building. Sure, my social feeds would have blown up, but Republican offices never would have taken my calls. Former Speaker Tip O'Neill says all politics is local. And I learned that really means members of Congress don't lose sleep over protests happening hundreds of miles away from their constituents. But they notice when a grieving family from their own state walks into their office with cameras waiting in the hallway. I'll come back to that in a bit. We had a strategy, but we still need the ask. Every meeting on the Hill eventually lands on the same question. What do you want us to do? Now, I'm wired to move fast, but the Hill doesn't work that way. If you walk in on day one and demand an outright ban, offices will smile politely and never call you back. So after talking it through the team, we landed on a letter, which we felt was very reasonable. I asked Senators Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott to send the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt a formal inquiry letter about the status of methylene chloride regulation. Now, you might be thinking, the letter, what's that really going to do? In a tightly aligned political environment, a signed letter from Graham and Scott was a shot across the bow. It forced the issue onto the EPA's radar and publicly tied those senators to a very simple question. Why hasn't this been addressed? Now, of course, there was some hesitation. They tried to stall, but they also knew that backing away from such a reasonable request would be politically risky, especially with that media interest. That experience led me to my first lesson. Systems can change, but only when somebody's willing to get off the mat and stay in the fight. Real change doesn't come from outrage alone. It comes from sustained presence, disciplined advocacy, and a refusing to leave when the process gets uncomfortable or slow. We crafted a strong strategy, but the media gave us the leverage to execute it and the platform to share it. I was introduced to CBS producer Sean Herbert and investigative reporter Anna Warner. They reported on methylene chloride earlier that year and saw Drew's story as the next chapter. And they were very interested in covering our political action on the Hill as well. When you walk into a senator's office and you say, do you mind if CBS records us walking in and out? They're covering the meeting. Everything changes. Staffers go full deer in headlights. The message is clear. This isn't a constituent drop-in. These folks mean business. Drew's story aired on CBS this morning. Then we held a press conference back at home in South Carolina. Remember when I said all politics is local? All media is too. National coverage matters, but local TV in a senator's home state can be a much bigger headache for them. Once Graham and Scott's office realized that most of the South Carolina press corps would be following us, that simple letter request became very hard to ignore, and it snowballed from there. CNN, NPR, the New York Times, USA Today, the Washington Post, the Associated Press. The more visible we became, the harder it was for corporations and politicians to ignore us. The awareness and change started to lock together. The media didn't just keep heat on the Hill, it kept momentum alive for all of us. Now, as that media attention grew, there's one thing I wish somebody told me sooner. Be patient. Change is hard, and you're going to fail a lot. The system you're going up against is built to outlast you, and in many ways it should. Decisions made at the highest levels of government, they touch millions of lives, not just one family. But if you stay persistent, you refuse to quit, cracks start to appear, and those lead to breakthrough moments. And the highs from those are so surreal, so powerful that for a second you forget the pain that it took to get to them. Now, my wife, Joanna Wynne, is the one who really taught me what patience looks like in practice. She was my confidant, my sounding board. She sat in meetings, drove me when I was at my sickest, picked me up when I was at my lowest. Joanna was almost always off camera, but she was still in the room. Now, at the time, she was serving as a major in the Army, and anyone with a service background knows, hurry up and wait. Change isn't easy. It's a long process. Think about who you're going up against. It's a federal machine fueled by special interest money and professional lobbyists. Those lobbyists, they can be intimidating. They have big budgets, tailored suits, but money can't buy happiness and it can't outrun passion. They work on a time card. They bill by the hour, and when the clock runs out, they go home. When you're fighting back with love and purpose, there is no clock. There is no off switch. Back then, Drew was on my mind 24/7. It mattered more to me than it ever could to them. Bringing me to lesson 2. Love is not soft, it's a force. Love fueled this fight, not sentiment, not anger, but devotion. Love organized people, sharpened arguments, and carried momentum on the days when exhaustion should have ended the work. So, what did it actually take? During my deposition, an attorney tried to smoke out the mastermind. Who paid for this? Who orchestrated it? I did. I paid for it, I planned it. It took more than 1,000 emails, hundreds of phone calls, and 5 trips to Capitol Hill. And that doesn't even account for my mom, who was a total bulldog as well. And I'm sure she would agree with this. Worth it. Worth every second. But I wasn't the catalyst. I didn't light the fuse. They did. They did it to themselves. If the EPA had done its job, if the chemical lobby hadn't tipped the scales and blocked a science-based ban, I wouldn't have been there at all. And I wish I hadn't, because that would mean that Drew was still alive. They stole at least 50 years from him, from us. Drew never got the chance to marry, have kids, chase the rest of his dreams. All that vanished in an instant because people in power chose profit over human life. That particular fight is over. We won. We got accountability and then some. The grief over Drew hasn't disappeared, it's evolved. I don't replay how he died as much as I remember how he lived and the legacy that he set in motion. Finally, lesson 3. One life can redirect history. Drew's life and his loss altered policy, protected future families, reshaped what safety now looks like, proving that no one is too ordinary to change the world. So the next time you find yourself in a situation that's clearly wrong, when you hear that voice saying, "Who's going to fix this?" I hope that you think of Drew Wynne. And I hope that his story gives you the courage to decide that that someone is you. Thank you.